Well, I'm Taylor, and again, I'd like to just thank all of y'all for A, coming here, and B, being a part of FOGI. There's no comparing what y'all have been able to do through the years since the mid '80s for us here in the historic district to really keep this intact and propel it into the future for generations to come. And we have our internship, countless other projects, but. We're going to go into a little bit of mid-century modern, bear with me, and a lot of this is going to be looking at cool pictures of houses, so stay tuned. And also, I like a lot of interaction, so I know there's a lot of people that know a lot about architecture in here, so bring it, ask questions, the dialogue is good. Don't feel like you just have to sit there and listen to me point at things. So we've got a kind of a running joke in our department, the Historic Resources Department, of whenever I say the phrase "something is an incredible structure," it would be turned into a drinking game, and it's been deemed unhealthy because people would be, have to go to the hospital, I guess. So I say incredible structure a lot. And y'all are going to see some really incredible structures in this presentation. So, mid-century modern, when you really, the philosophy of this, basically, you're looking at the close of World War II and then going into mid-1970s for the most part. Jekyll we're calling it, 1955 to about 1972, 73. And that's the time frame, but basically it's a breaking down of the design of the house, basically. So you have this Victorian, a lot of ornament moving through to the early 20th century and craftsman style and things like that, and then you just start sparing it down to the actual elements of the building being ornament, which is really fascinating to me. So you're breaking down this building, for instance, breaking it down to these panels of glass, the exposed rafter tails, the beams, these flat roofs. You're looking at, a structural member here that's now an important decorative element that the house would not exist without these elements, and you're showcasing them as the ornament of the house. And something else that's really interesting is you start to see the blurring of the line between interior and exterior space. I think a lot of people here know this house. This is kind of the quintessential mid-century modern house. The current owners are really excited about this house. A lot of people know it as Miss Jean Polzek's house. If anybody's been in here, you have just this vista. I mean, you feel like you're outside when you're sitting in this living room. So we'll see a few images. You'll actually see this house come up several times in this presentation, but we'll go inside this one for a few photos a little bit later. But we also have something that leads to these elemental changes as the advent of HVAC in these houses, the popularization of the automobile. You think of Victorian era or even late 19th century structures. You are not focused. You'll see a carriage house periodically, but you're not focused on the new innovation of the automobile. These houses take that into consideration. The automobile is a member of the family at this point and has a home within the house footprint usually. Also electricity. So these houses were built with all these modern comforts that we know today. They were actually conceived and built with Hollybourne Cottage, for instance, was not built with electricity in mind. A lot of our cottages in the historic district weren't, but very different case with these. So, start it going. So, all roads lead to Rome. Well, all mid-century modern roads lead to this guy. This is Frank Lloyd Wright, and I think we have a Frank Lloyd Wright file here too. But basically. Actually, I skipped ahead a little bit, so if you don't mind, we'll pause on Frank Lloyd Wright for just a minute. But we're going to go into a few elements of terminology, some vocab that we're going to get to in a little bit. The building materials of breeze blocks, the CMU concrete masonry units. You're going to see those a lot in this presentation and a lot on Jekyll. They're innovated during World War II, so it's kind of a big deal to start seeing these sheet good elements that are mass-produced and available to people. Roman brick, that's an elongated brick. You see that a lot on Jekyll. Rusticated brick, which is a block or a brick that's kind of broken and made to look old. Exposed rafter tails, like I mentioned. Board and batten, which is a vertical, you have these vertical boards with a very slender vertical board bridging the gap. And it's a very old-fashioned, almost rural, vernacular structure style, but that's brought into these buildings, and it looks crisp and clean, and you'll see some of that in a minute. The obscured entry, which is really a fascinating element that Frank Lloyd Wright really dealt with a lot, but you basically have your house in view, and you look at it and think, well, how do we get into this place? It's the entry is sometimes hidden, and it's a really interesting element of this time period. A centralized chimney, a chimney stack that is anchoring the house to the earth. Low pitch roofs, of course, banks of windows, terrazzo floors, and one of my favorite things, Porex panels. And we'll talk about what Porex is in a few minutes, and some of y'all will recognize it when you see it. Well, what we have on Jekyll Island is, what makes Jekyll Island so unique is the tight time frame of construction. Like I mentioned, the 1955 time frame to the early mid-70s. The 1955 is because of the opening of the causeway, that kind of thing. So we have this really tight grouping of houses where you don't have structure. I mean, we have the historic district, of course, but you don't have this, long timeline of 150 years of construction. You really saw a lot of activity right then in this time period that we're talking about. The other thing that we have is all the associated documents with these houses, which is fascinating. It is an absolute treasure trove of information. So any house on Jekyll, we have the original blueprints and the documents supporting any additions and alterations made to that house. That's fascinating. If you can go in and actually look at these Cormac McGarvey designed structures and see the real drawings, we have them, a lot of them digitized now, actually. And so eventually they'll be available for the homeowners to be able to peruse and I think buy copies, right? So we got to make a little money on it. But and so that's a fascinating element. And again, I keep referencing the historic district. I mean, that's where I work. That's where a lot of my activities take place. But you have these northern wealthy people coming here in the late 19th century and building these, cottages, these, island, South, Georgia beach houses. And you have the same thing happening in the mid-century. You have these high-style mid-century modern houses, not to that level, of course, but still, to have an extra beach house, you would be of means, so you would be choosing to build out of something that makes somewhat of a statement. And the statement of the time were flat roofs and banks of windows and that mid-century look. I've got a quote, and a while back, someone I very much admire and respect once asked me if a house that on Jekyll was mid-century modern or just unpleasant to look at. And it was mid-century modern. And so I want to challenge everybody in all the houses we see, if we see one, in opinions, absolutely. But tell me at the end if we saw any ugly houses. So I'm sorry to keep Mr. Wright waiting. But Frank Lloyd Wright, prairie style, and again, please, we do have a Frank Lloyd Wright expert, not to put you on the spot in the house, but jump in at any given time. But one fascinating thing that I've always enjoyed of the Frank Lloyd Wright, digging into Frank Lloyd Wright stuff, was he saw all habitation as taking place within either a cave or a tent. You're really going to see where that is exploded. And so the cave becomes the tent. You start seeing that open that blurring of interior and exterior space, which is a really, really interesting, cool way to look at things. I like to say that Frank Lloyd Wright blew the doors off of American architecture by blowing the walls out. So he came in with these banks of glass and lots of really interesting cantilevered roof lines that you can really see. When we see a couple of these images, you're going to see where we got to on Jekyll. So a real brief, quick look at some of the evolution of his work, and you can see what's happening here. So this is the Winslow House, about 1895, and so when you think about this is only 5 years after Hollybourne, 1 year before Moss Cottage, and you see the statement he's making here, and it's still, I mean, you have a front entry, but you can see something's happening. That central anchoring chimney, that prairie roof, the prairie is very flat, very horizontal, and so that's where he's getting a lot of inspiration for this in Illinois and a little bit later in Wisconsin. But so you can kind of see that he's playing with like how you perforate a building with the windows and the roof line and just kind of the overall look of a building, of a home. And then a little bit later you get to my favorite Frank Lloyd Wright house, which is the Roby House, and this is in Chicago, Illinois. And he got a cave and a 10 out of this, in my opinion. But you see these are all leaded glass windows going down, that center mass of an anchoring chimney stack, anchoring the building to the earth, and really incredible cantilevered roof line. So you can really start seeing this in some of the buildings that we're going to look at. And this is, 1909. And so he was a pretty forward-thinking guy. And then all bets are off now, because is anybody familiar with any of these houses? I haven't been to this one. It's on my list. I've never been, but I mean, look at that thing. It's pretty incredible. Fast forward a few decades, and you start seeing these elements brought into mass-produced or mass available, I should say, dwelling. So this is an interesting concept, and it goes back pretty far. So this is from the Pullman catalog, and we actually have it up on the display table up there. But kind of you can go through, similar to the Sears and Roebuck, and lots of other architectural catalogs from the Victorian era, the George F. Barber catalog. But you could go through and pick your vacation house or your house or whatever, and then get the plans and replicate that all over the country and theoretically the world. I've been told that this one looks like a Pizza Hut, so I thought that was interesting. But so we have, in that magazine, we do have 2 houses on Jekyll that I know of, maybe more, that came from that magazine. This house, there are 2 of these. One's been pretty drastically altered. The other one is almost all original, and y'all might know this house, and it is an incredible structure. So I don't think we're serving any alcohol tonight, so I think we'll be okay. But going back to kind of the timeline that we're looking at, we're going to look at another floor plan of the actual house that was built on Jekyll. But back to the timeline, we have Governor Talmadge coming across the causeway. With him comes lots of building materials to Jekyll to build houses. Think about the difficulty of building a structure on this island pre-1954. It was going to be, a pretty big undertaking. Once this opens the door, you start seeing structures being built. And not mid-century, but always include these. We did a big rehab of these a few years ago, but this was one of our mid-century modern architects of note. He and his partner designed these buildings, and to my understanding, after talking to his partner's daughter, there was a big falling out. This is Larry Miller and Joe Schlosser, and these caused a dissolvement of their partnership. But then they got to be partners again when they built the Seafair, which is kind of neat. About a decade later. So the next one is our for lack of a better phrasing, are Frank Lloyd Wright. We included this one for our original presentation because we knew this is Cormac McGarvey. His sister and grandchildren came to the thing, and we wanted to put a couple of those guys. One of those guys was actually here, which is kind of fun. But Cormac McGarvey, fascinating individual, old Brunswick fella. His grandson owns the Wee Pub, if anybody is familiar with that, Kevin McGarvey. But was an institution in this area and designed many, many interesting structures all around Jekyll and Glenn County, and we'll look at those in a minute. I mentioned the vocab, and I did want to just real quick give people overview of kind of some of the things that we're looking at. And please, if I'm saying something that somebody doesn't know what it is, don't hesitate to let me know. Real quick, we've got, I mentioned terrazzo floor and breeze blocks. So this is a terrazzo. I think most people have probably seen this, and we actually have it in our convention center now. So it's that harkening back to this mid-century design, but it's essentially a floated grout floor with stones and glass cast into it. It cures, you come back and grind the top off, and it's really an interesting floor, very popular in the 1950s and 60s. This actually came from a house that you're going to see a few slides of. It's one of the more interesting colors. All the dark colors in there is really neat. This is from the same house. This little jut out just to hide some of the original HVAC systems and stuff. With this little breeze block wall. But those are breeze blocks, cast concrete masonry units essentially put on their side that have kind of a decorative webbed design, and you're left with a really interesting screening element that's made of concrete. This is Porex. Does anybody recognize this? It's growing up in Glenn County, all of our elementary schools had this as a ceiling. They were panels about 18 inches or so wide, and they're made out of wood shavings, pine straw, cement, and a little bit of asbestos in there just for fun. And the fun thing is, these were made in Brunswick. And so I'm sure you see these in other places elsewhere, but when you see these, this is a very local material. And one of the houses that are one of these mid-century gyms had a pine tree fall on it maybe a year ago. And the owner was actually going through a lot of effort to be able to find something that can mimic that look, because it is very striking today. And a lot of people covered it up, got rid of it, or what else. And we won't ask about the ones that got rid of it and where it got abated to, but it's a really local, really interesting material. What are they? Ceiling panels. So they can range in thickness, but basically you build up your roof on top of that. And it's sound dampening, some insulation, not a ton of insulation, but it really was a neat use of waste material essentially with a little bit of material put in. And again, when you drive across the City Lanier Bridge in the south end of Brunswick, if people remember the old Bestwall plant, that's where they were making this in this time period. So
still in my breezeway.
Really? Don't get rid of it. It's great stuff. It's great stuff. The breeze block, and then this is kind of a breeze brick lattice wall, which is pretty interesting. You see this a lot throughout American architecture, but when you see it utilized this way, it really creates that screening effect, again, just like the breeze blocks do. This one, again, is not on Jekyll. This is the Roby House, but Roman brick. It's an elongated, usually thinner brick, and if you notice, if you look closely, you actually have the vertical mortar joints are actually colored similarly to the brick and flush with the brick face to give it that horizontality that Frank Lloyd Wright was really going for. And also we have this is a Jekyll house, the exposed beams, and that I call it a clear story gable window. And it's you see that a lot on Jekyll, and that's just really one of those defining elements. And then rafter tails over here, and again, another perforated block wall. And then this is the board and batten I was talking about. So you have these design elements that are strictly vertical, but somehow with that house, it reads as a horizontal. It really accentuates the horizontality of that house, which is pretty interesting. Well, back to Cormac in Brunswick. This was his home. I'm not sure if anybody has been on Lanier Boulevard in Brunswick, but this was his home and studio. Unfortunately, it flooded, I believe, with Irma, but people live there and they're taking care of it, and they've dried it out, and I think it's all back in business. But it's a very interesting, very unique house, 1956, 55 or 56, I believe. But that shows you, it was kind of a point of conversation in Brunswick that I understand, that when he was building that, because it's built in Windsor Park right next to very more traditional structures. So
Is that the front of the house?
that's the front of the house.
So there's no walkway to...
There's no walkway. It does have a visible front door and everything, but you're right, there's no real walkway per se to tell you that that's the front of the house. But it really is a remarkable structure, definitely. He also designed the Catholic Church, St. Francis Xavier, and if anybody's been in that, it has an ethereal, otherworldly feel with terrazzo flooring. My personal favorite of his structures, other than the houses on Jekyll, was this building. We have a under construction photo on the table, but this was the casino on St. Simon's. Does anybody remember this building? It was, as a kid who grew up on St. Simon's, our life took place in this building. It was a kind of a community center, bowling alley in the basement, community activities on the first floor, skating rink up top. My mom's not in the audience tonight, but we used to climb on the roof of this one a lot. So we'd go out a window and get up there. It was really quite a structure. When I was in undergrad, and I was in a drawing and painting class, and we had a guest artist come in to do a demonstration, and she had heard, we were telling her where we were from, and I'd mentioned St. Simon's, and she pulled out another notebook, and she had a lot of sketches of this building, and she said, "Oh, I just love that building in the village, it's so cool," and it was right around the time when they tore it down, so it was pretty unfortunate. I'd love to remember her name and find some of her sketches, but it was quite a structure, definitely. We're going to get back to Jekyll, and so I mentioned the house, the Pullman house from the blueprints. There's something about this. Some of y'all might recognize this house. I won't say exactly which one, but there are two on Jekyll. You see the focus on this carport. This was changed slightly to enter. The carport actually enters this way, but I don't know what it is, but it reminds me of a pocket knife or something. But it's just such an interesting structure. You have this hexagonal chimney that comes up through the middle of the structure, and the kitchen is actually kind of based off of that in this area. And then you have this living room that just radiates out from that, I guess, semi-hexagonal, half of that hexagon fireplace. And it is something that you would not have thought to have built in the 1890s. This is something really, really interesting. So one that's a little bit, and this part of the presentation, we're just going to kind of look at some cool buildings, if y'all are cool with that. This is not super remarkable as a building, a mid-century modern building goes, but it is a mid-century modern building, and the remarkable part of it, it is the first, to my knowledge, building house, one of the two first houses built in the mid-century style. We had some that were commissioned to be built right just after this one, but as far as I know, this predates them all. And this was Larry Miller, and this was actually it's on Bliss Lane. This was actually Toulouse Fish. If anybody knows who she was our first curator. This was her house. So it's a very simple house. It's very modest, but it really has a lot of those mid-century elements that make it. You kind of see that opening the door for what comes to Jekyll in the coming years. One of my favorites. This is a Cormac McGarvey design, and again, his stuff is really just amazing. It's you have the obscured doorway. I mean, how do you get into that house? It's actually over here and then back this way. but it's a cube essentially. But that it reads as a very horizontal house. Am I wrong? It's very that overhang, that sweeping roof overhang. It's just the banks of windows. It's really, really an interesting structure. And this was 1961. This one is our end cap for our mid-century modern. It's down on the south end of St. Andrews, and we have a rusticated block. It's actually an oversized block that has a texture to it. The kitchen's on the upper story. You have this massive wall of glass. And to me, I love this structure. And a lot of people I've heard it referred to as the bank house. And it does have a very institutional look, but it really is quite a structure. And then this one, we have a couple of these and a couple of variants of this one. If you look at the exposed rafter tails, the breeze block, entry, and this is actually an open atrium as you walk into the building. The terrazzo floor is that we've met with this family, and the terrazzo floor is there but covered with a floating floor because terrazzo is one of the hardest things to match and get right. Anytime you patch it, you're going to know it's a patch, and it's pretty, you have to jump over that bridge and really know what you're doing with that. The woman that owns this said, she's an older woman, and she said that she didn't know if she could find someone to patch it, so she floated the floor. So whoever owns the house later down the road, if they have a way to patch it, they can. And I think that's a really forward-thinking way to look at this instead of just tiling over it or something like that. So it kept that little piece intact and protected under the floor. And so we're back to this one. This is a Cormac McGarvey. And we kind of like to include these original drawings. I just feel like that's really, really interesting to see with the structure. This is one Sheldon, and so just the banks of windows, the breeze blocks here, and it screams mid-century modern. Also, it's got the CMU, the blocks, and they're oriented to be stacked just on one on top of the other, so all the mortar joints line up as a grid, which is also adding to that horizontality. There's two of these on the aisle, two that I know of. And this one's pretty interesting to me. This has been, aside from the painted brick, it's unaltered from the exterior. Small house, but very well proportioned and put together. The carport's still there. The little sunroom, mudroom kind of area is still intact, very much like its original drawing. These were the Knox Corporation out of Thompson, Georgia, which is kind of neat because it's a Georgia mail order architectural catalog, which anything from Georgia I think is pretty neat. So breeze blocks, that's about as many as you can get. And remember, it's showcasing that house for the car. So, and then you have that inset doorway, entryway. This is another Cormac design. It's small, it's on hide, but if you notice, board and batten walls and just really flat. If you look at that, that is about as flat a roof as you can get. It's one of his earlier ones over here, so it's pretty interesting. Another great one, Roman rusticated brick, actually. Clerestory windows, clerestory gables, and then that obscured atrium that you come into the front of it. This one's over on the beach, and this was originally the Jim Gillis house with the highway department, which is kind of interesting to kind of see some of the names when you go through and see the original builders of these houses, and you've heard their names, you've driven on the highways that are named after them. It's a fun kind of who's who of Georgia politics and just people who were involved in Georgia, the happenings of Georgia in the 1950s and 60s.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there a color palette that goes for this era?
Well, there is, definitely. And they're kind of vibrant colors in a lot of ways. The This kind of, in historic preservation circles, this name has a color, and it's called asylum green. And they were used in asylums. That's a fun color. But you see a lot of that. When we go on the inside of the Sheldon house, you'll see some really cool intact colors that they kept.
Is
But
there a place you can find it?
I'm sure there will be. We don't have anything set up currently, but that's something we should definitely look at with how we're taking this mid-century program into the future. So. This is that board and batten on Riverview. You can really see, again, the just center anchoring chimney, bank of windows, board and batten exterior walls. Basically, everything's exposed on this house. It's so cool. It's you have all those rafter tails. It's just a really pivotal example of that breaking down the elements that make up the house and showcasing them as ornament, which I feel is really just an honest way of designing a building. Clerestory, very horizontal. Again, two-story, but all the same elements apply, definitely. So now we're going to go to our next two. You've seen this one multiple times, but we're going to talk about this one and then one more. This, of course, is the quintessential mid-century modern house on Jekyll. This one is also one of them. This was actually designed by the fellow that built my house in Brunswick, and there's a good chance this house was designed in Ardennes, which is kind of neat to me. But the one reason I like to include this is both of these houses are expertly, just perfectly curated with what they've brought into the house. So really, they're enjoying that mid-century modern. They want that to be the vibe of the house. Also, I'm not sure exactly when, but probably mid-1980s, this was added. And so it was done in a very sensitive way that did not distract from the mid-century feel of the building from the inside or the exterior. And so as we go down the road, in historic preservation, you have to make the houses work for the people that own them. And so there will be some additions being made periodically. And so having them done in a sensitive, complementary way, I think is very important. So let's go inside a couple of them. So this is that house, actually. And you see that verticality of that grid. And that's our friend Porex right there with the exposed beams. This one actually had a drop ceiling in it. And it was used by the previous owners as a vacation house and a rental. And so it was just kind of the beach house. And so it had the drop ceilings, and not a lot was being paid, of attention was being paid to kind of what it was. The previous owner was actually one of our volunteers, and they had listed it for sale for a little while and no bites. And then they had the realtor add the words mid-century modern, and then it sold. So it's kind of interesting. But the current owner, again, I mean, she's bringing in very mid-century furnishings, and she had the drop ceilings pulled out. She's done a lot of stuff to get it back to its original state, which is really, really cool. So there's not in this one in particular. There can be, though. So if you want to keep that intact, you can put in, there are methods to do that with furring strips and rigid foam panels. And so, in all honesty, you cannot change the structure and the design of the house and still make it meet, current HVAC, sealing the envelope, so to speak. So that one does not. They're right around the area that pops up through the roof. That does have some insulation panels, but the rest of the house does not. So same with this one. But this is the foyer of the one Sheldon house, the Gene Polzak's old house. And notice the built-in planter box, and just for a 1961 ranch house, that is a very impressive foyer. They were making a statement with this Cormac McGarvey structure. So, love that. So, somebody asked about the palette. I mean, pink, teal, I mean, turquoise, I guess. And then, notice the Fiesta ware and everything up there. So, again, she's done a lot of work to keep this as mid-century feeling as possible. But, so that's a 1961 kitchen for sure. This is looking down in the house with the little bump out up top, the kind of the sunroom, the upstairs, second story sunroom. And you can see our terrazzo, our dark terrazzo, our Roman brick, and that off-center fireplace is very, very mid-century. And again, this was the one that C.G. Taylor designed, possibly in our den. So I think that's kind of cool. And when I mentioned the cave in the tent, you can really see all of that exterior light, everything flowing in. You have that corner fireplace. Really, really an incredible layout and an incredible design. My favorite part about this is every room in the house, except for one bathroom, has a view of the river, which is pretty impressive. I mean, you don't get that with you had to have somebody like Cormac McGarvey to design your house to have it have that much of an impressive impact on that exterior view coming in. So the next ones are going to be kind of non-residential structures. Alas, we've lost this one, but it was a very interesting building. If we, Jones, you might remember Bruce, I was coming across the causeway when this was coming down. I was on Jekyll when this was coming down, and I almost pulled off to ask somebody for one of the blue bricks, because all of our homecomings and proms and lots of stuff happened here too growing up, and I wanted some memento. I went back like a couple of days later. It was so efficient when they cleaned up everything. I mentioned it to Bruce when I started here, the old director of historic resources from years ago, and I came to my desk and he had that sitting on my desk. He found somewhere, I don't know where, I didn't ask any questions, but I mentioned that I had missed out on getting a brick, and he found me one, which I appreciate. But anyway, this was an incredible building. Really, I mean, it kind of nailed that time period, and we'll look at a few images of that. These hyperbolic, parabolic, I don't know what you would call them, but these wings, cast concrete wings. This was kind of, as a kid, this was what Jekyll was. It was Fuller and Beckett. I should have mentioned that. That was the architectural firm that designed this building. And I mentioned this last time. This is, 1961, 62. This is when, the space race is going on. And if you pull onto Jekyll and you see this structure, you're going to say, hey, we're going to the moon pretty soon. I mean, this is something. This is definitely not your everyday convention center. And I love the little beach house with the old barrel vaulting. And, of course, the aquarama, the golf ball. We'll look at that one, too. I mentioned this last time when my parents were here. My sister got up on the high dive when she was a kid and was scared, but finally jumped off, and my dad said it was the proudest he'd ever been of her. And I said, well, she's made a lot of other accomplishments since then. He's like, that's the proudest I've ever been of her. So, and you can see the old shopping center over there too. And Dolphin Club down at the south end. Larry Miller, the guy we were talking about earlier, he designed that one. Also the auditorium there, you see that, more of a prefab kind of structure, but still it has those same elements of design, which is really interesting. And people like Percy Sledge and I think James Brown, they played there, which is pretty interesting. And we have our Gould Gymnasium. Also, we're talking about music. The Allman Brothers played there, which is kind of neat. This was the mid-century element that was built 1958-59. Demolished in, I believe, 1993, and it did not fit. I mean, I think everybody can agree. I love mid-century modern. That doesn't fit. It's interesting, but it doesn't fit. But it's, again, kind of hearkening to that just kind of odd little blue awning that comes out, that juts out of there next to a 1913 stuccoed auditorium, essentially. This was the inn facing Hollyborn. So we actually have some interesting photos of them tearing it down in-house, I believe, which is, I don't think we'd do that today. But all of this has been pulled up, and it's a little different today. But
I didn't understand where you said it was.
do you know where the back of Hollyborn Cottage is? This faces the back of Hollyborn, so this faces west. And a little better close-up of yeah. It was a neat structure. These were precast concrete barrel vaults, which kind of fit together. Again, going with that prefab element, but still, I mean, to me, that was a portion of Jekyll, and the last that we have of it is out of the pier. So it's not the exact same form work, but it's very hearkening back and forth to each other. This is an old photo when they had the bathrooms out there. But then we have the Presbyterian Church, and if anybody's been in here, and we talk about blurring the interior with the exterior, this literally juts out into the flower bed. I mean, it doesn't get, I mean, you're just a thin pane of glass away from being outside. So a very interesting structure. The curved tabby wall is just fascinating to me. That's true. That's a 1960s era tabby. It's Portland mixed with a Worcester shell aggregate, but in a curved form, which I find really interesting. But then this is the rendering for the Bull and Kinney architectural drawing for the golf course, the golf clubhouse, excuse me. And it's kind of interesting to know it today and to see it then. And you see how they're reading that horizontality of that brickwork. And I can, architecture people can make fun of me for this, but I call it, there's a little element of coastal brutalism. It's this cast concrete and this interesting dynamic of something that you wouldn't necessarily pick for that area, but it works. And then if anybody, I'm sure, has been up here, I mean, you have that vista of, you see everything up there. It's your unobstructed views of the golf course. Then another just billboard for Jekyll, these guys. R.D. Cole Spherical Tank Company in Noonan, Georgia. And 1957, 59, this was just a billboard for what was happening here in the mid-century. We were advertising golf. Like, golf was huge, still is, but we were trying to get people to come to Jekyll Island for golf. And what better way to do that than a giant golf ball that also serves as a water tower, which is, I find, just great. So the hotels, or excuse me, motels, the Corsair, this is the Days Inn, and believe it or not, there's still a lot of this intact. It's been covered up, lots of refurbishments, lots of remodelings. Like, it actually has a lot of the air conditioning systems up in a pitched roof now. It doesn't have the flat roof, but that Nautilus restaurant is still in the same, it's not the Nautilus anymore, but it's still in the same location. So that's still there. When you drive by, check out some of these. The Seafarer, the Holiday Inn was the Wanderer. I mean, this one, it's just really, really interesting. One thing that is missing is this little element, this octagonal structure in the front, which harkens to the old Welcome Center. As you came on to where the Welcome Center is, there was a very similar structure there too. Which again, it just kind of, to me, as growing up over here, or growing up coming over here, it screams that Jekyll architectural vibe. And then this was the Jekyll Estates, now the Beachview and Club. And so now we get to our more interesting quandary. So, does everybody know what this building is? Pulitzer Cottage, built in 1906. So it is not mid-century by any stretch of the imagination, but in the mid-century, when the state of Georgia took over or came to Jekyll Island, a lot of these structures that are priceless today, Hollyborn Cottage, Crane Cottage, Indian Mound, these were not seen as the priceless elements of history and architecture that we see them today. This was a, 50-year-old house, and that needed a lot of work, that it had a small fire in it. This was a 50-year-old house that was basically, for lack of a better word, an albatross for the state of Georgia to have to do work on, to take care of. So there was a small fire, and they elected to bulldoze it, to knock it down, to raise it. So preservation is relative. This is what we have today, is just the green space, which is great too, but I think pretty much everybody would be pretty excited to see the Pulitzer cottage there today. But his preservation is relative. So this is as old, or in some cases even younger, than some of the houses that are being demoed today, that are being removed and something else built in its place. And so that's kind of the battle cry, is to these places are going to, in 10 years, the survivors that we have on Jekyll, because we have a lot of small structures that are a stone's throw from the beach that, as people come over, they're going to want bigger and, more modern stuff, and they're going to start removing a lot of these structures. So this is kind of my plea, my battle cry to say, it's time to start looking at these structures and valuing them for their architectural significance. So we've done a few things to help with that. This is just kind of a mid-century map placeholder. We've done a pretty extensive survey of Jekyll Island and all of our built environment, actually, and that's right here. It will be available online eventually, but this is a survey of everything that we have, and we have it kind of broken down into traditionally in a historic district, when you're laying out what you're going to be doing for your historic district, you categorize houses into contributing to the historic nature of the district, non-contributing, and intrusion. And so we have basically been able to do this overlay of Jekyll with contributing, non-contributing, and intrusion. Then we have another category that, for lack of another name, just colloquially in our department, we call the Cadillac houses. And so that's what you've seen in this presentation. There's a lot of them. There's probably between 25 and 30 of those that are just standalone, mid-century modern masterpieces that a few of y'all live in this crowd. So those are what we really want to kind of showcase and bring attention to and awareness. And we've had a few guided tours and of a few of the places, a few of those houses. And we have this mid-century modern map that's in process of being made, that's going to be kind of a driving tour where you can pick it up at the museum, and it'll have an audio element, and several people have agreed to have their houses in this, and it's just a drive by the house and look at it. There might be we'll figure out how to notate it on the map or notate it in the yard or something like that. People have been on driving tours before, I'm sure. We used to have one in Brunswick where we'd have a big 4-foot sign in the yard where it denotes where it is on the list. We won't be doing that, but something potentially with a modern flair that you can do through your phone or your radio too, that goes along with this, which we're really excited about. And also, presentations like this. This is my attempt to at least let people know my enthusiasm for these structures, and hopefully people can pick up on that and maybe leave with a few things to look for on Jekyll. We had one of our volunteers ran into a woman on riding her bike after our last presentation, and she was looking for some of the elements that we were talking about, which I took that as a big compliment. But so my next question is, did anybody see any ugly houses? Okay, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But any questions? Any questions? Well, y'all, I hope I didn't run through that too fast, and I hope it was somewhat educational and informative, and I appreciate y'all coming. So,